2023, and I'm going to be reading from starting at chapter 28 of Hope's Kiss. Gary had always hated going to church until recently. Now it was an escape from home, and he really looked forward to the snack and craft. He was surprised when Miss Little asked him to come back to the church on Wednesday night. She told him he could bring his favorite toy. At that point, he realized he couldn't come because he had no toys. He left his house early every morning and spent most of his days in the woods. When his mom and dad split up, he and his mom had left the apartment in the middle of the night with nothing but the clothes on their back. His mother never got around to buying him anything to play with. She hardly ever even bought food other than Wonder Bread and peanut butter and fluff. It felt like Christmas on a few occasions. His mom's new boyfriend ordered pizza, a hot meal. Chapter 29. Constable Paul Snyder surveyed the church sanctuary, baffled. Here were, at last count, 72 dead bodies. What went on here, mass murder or suicide? That was only the first question. By the look of this, he suspected these folks were willing participants. In the first pew to the right he entered, he saw an oversized teenage girl wearing a yellow neon hooded sweatshirt. Laying crumpled at her feet was a shrunken, gray-haired woman he guesstimated to be in her 70s. Beyond them was a long-haired, skinny, bearded, tattooed man. On the pew to the left was the remains of a well-turned-out, manicured woman in her 30s. Beside her on the floor was a shaved-headed, tattooed youth with skateboards standing by, apparently to ride the gold-paved streets of heaven. The ripe stink of urine and feces clouded the air. On the far side of the pew was a stoop-shouldered, wrinkled old man with gray, overgrown eyebrows. The next bench up contained a mostly bald, British-haired man who was wearing a neon green t-shirt and a blue and white pinstripe jacket over baggy jeans. Next to him was a tall, black-haired man in his 40s wearing a purple and yellow plaid shirt under paint-stained overalls. On the opposite side was a man with a salt and pepper beard and pot belly in a worn maintenance uniform. Just beyond him was a woman in a pale pink dress and a turquoise vest. Beside her was a younger woman in tight jeans and a rainbow checkered rain jacket. On the floor beside her was an even younger girl with long, dark, curly hair covered in a navy blue bandana. In a pew forward of them was the body of a woman in her 40s wearing a red and black flannel jacket and a burgundy knitted hat with her arm wrapped around the shoulders of another teenage girl who had brought with her a backpack and designer handbag. Perhaps she planned on doing some shopping in heaven. Finally, he reached the front of the church. The reverend was appropriately sprawled out in death across the pulpit. An oversized Bible lay open and askew on the floor beside him. The book of Revelations. Paul heard a shout of glee from the back of the church. He turned to see one of his team charging towards him with a big grin of pride. Jennifer Dixon held up a small laptop and said, "Guess what I have here?" Dismissively, he returned, "I have no time to play games. What is it?" "This little baby has a whole show recorded for posterity, the cherry on top of all the physical evidence." He plucked the rubber gloves from his pocket and then pulled them onto his large hand and took the PC. He smiled and said, "Good find. Now help your team complete the job." He stepped out of the doors of the church, not thinking that the yard would be crawling with press now. He took a deep breath and made a beeline for his car, answering each query with the same two words, "No comment." Despite this, his car was swarmed by both members of the community and the press as he slowly made his way out into the street. Chapter 30. Helen picked up the ancient black rotary phone's receiver and slowly and painfully dialed the number. When the ringing ended with a pickup, she spoke, "Hello? Hello, Carrie?" "Oh, hi, Helen." She spoke softly into the phone and sniffled. "How are you making out, dear?" "Not too good, Helen. They took MJ to the States and they won't let me go and see her because of terrorism charge, and I miss her so much, and every little noise I hear at night, I wake up and then I think, oh, it's just MJ, and then I remember it's not. She's not here. I can't watch anything on TV, and all I can think of is what we would watch together. But I won't because that will just make me miss her more. I miss her rubbing my feet on the pile of big spoons that grew at the end of the couch because she brought a fresh one to remove the tea bag every time she got a tea. I miss her bringing me tea in the morning, and the worst part is I have no idea when I'll see her again or even talk to her on the phone. Oh my God, Helen, how selfish of me. How are you? Helen returned, "Oh, I'm fine, honey. Don't worry about me. I just called to see if there was something I could do to help. I made one of those fish casseroles. It's too much for me alone. Why don't you come over and help me eat it?" Terry blew her nose and apologized. She hummed and hawed, but at last gave in and agreed to come over in an hour. Chapter 31. Constable Snyder opened the laptop, and 40 minutes had passed before he finally found his way around this unfamiliar system. He picked up his coffee and opened the spout on the plastic cover and snipped. He always did the same when he opened his coffee. He clicked the mouse on play and lifted the paper cup to his lips. The clip showed beyond the shadow of a doubt that the people had all chosen to die. According to the video, they believed they were getting ahead of the pale horsemen of the apocalypse. The preacher bound together some recent news reports about 8,000 people dying from a bad batch of flu vaccine, the side effects of eating GMO foods, and Revelation 6:8, and reassured them all that God was expecting them because if they jumped the queue on the pale horseman, it would prove they were God's chosen. Paul removed the cover of his cup and swirled the cold coffee around to dissolve the sugar that must have slipped to the bottom, and scratched his nose, trying to wrap his head around a church full of people committing a sin of suicide because they believed in predestination. If you were destined, it was believed that if you were destined for heaven, it happened before you were even born. And it couldn't, what happened here before couldn't affect your afterlife. What this minister promised his sheep was freedom from hunger, pain, suffering, and especially the fear of all that appeared on the event horizon about to happen. That may not have been a ticket to heaven's pearly gates, but it looked to be like it could be a hall pass from suffering in this life in the coming times. This was truly a church full of believers. The leader served the final communion with lethal grape juice to chase the wafer. They were betting on odds in the race against the horse named Death. Here's the quote that the minister quoted, the International Standard Version. "I looked, and there was a pale green horse. Its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed him. They were given authority over 1/4 of the earth to kill people using wars, famines, plagues, and wild animals of the earth." The preacher claimed wild animals of the earth could be translated to nature's elements, winds, floods, tsunamis, earthquakes, the results of mining and acid rain. This guy sure had all his bases covered. Paul sent the file out to those who needed it and shut the laptop. He opened his own PC and filed the appropriate online forms for the hours he spent today on this case. He opened another email from the National Policeman's Administration. This was a red flag to a recent trend of group suicides. It was causing havoc with full-time and part-time employees because some part-timers were complaining of too many extra hours, while the full-timers were complaining about not being able to get any time off for appointments. Due to this development, neighboring police departments were being shipped into areas experiencing elevated suicide rates to relieve the pressure on already stressed-out staff. That was good to know. He sent an email to the relevant dispatcher requesting as many extra officers as possible. He had the time on the screen, 6:48, time to go and pick up his twin 5-year-olds. The best hours of his day were spent with these two delights. What could be easier on the head than hanging with kids that delight in blowing bubbles and giggling over SpongeBob? They would get home and have a bath, and he'd read them a story and tuck them in. He was getting a little bored with the same book, though. Every night for the last 2 months, the requested book was I Love You Forever. After a while, it wears on you. He suggested Sherry Fitch's Toes in My Nose, but they kept up the same desperate plea for Love You. Maybe he should just take them to the library and let them each pick several different ones to read this week, taking turns. Of all his accomplishments, these children were his pride and joy. His ex-partner had returned home to Africa, but accepted the children would do better with him, even if he did have a demanding job. He also had an incredible sister who more or less co-parented the girls with him. Between them, they managed all the appointments and classes and practices. On the odd occasion either of them was able to ferry the children, he was blessed with the help of a close neighbor who could rescue them in a pinch. He loaded himself into his Jeep Wrangler and made haste to his sisters to grab his delights and get everybody snugged in for the night. He wondered what his replacement this shift would make of the recording of the absurd acts committed by all those people. He chuckled when he remembered that Danny was an atheist. This kind of stuff sure makes the Christians look silly, he thought. He glanced at the old shut down pulp and paper mill as he passed. He felt a pang of loss again. This mill had been a vital part of this town for the previous 30 years. With its demise went the heart and spirit of this area. The suicide rate had begun to grow within a year after the mill closure. There were buyouts and the promise of retaining, but those promises were empty. Nothing came except the community college and call centers. It was soon known that call centers were intellectual sweatshops. He turned on the radio as he swung onto the highway in time to hear the second murder suicide in a month was reported from the small village of Gagetown this morning. Neighbors returning their loose dog discovered the family's remains. It is speculated that this was another crisis brought on by the economic stress from mill closure several years ago, combined with severe medical issues. At this point, it's believed that the wife shot two children, aged 3 and 4, her husband, and then herself. A community memorial service is planned for this Saturday in the area. He turned the radio off just before he shut the car off in his sister's yard. And that's all for today. So I hope you have a good day and make happy thoughts.